storytelling is just the baseline. It's fundamental. And so I wanted to be, look, I'm a Hollywood guy. So much of what Hollywood really is what you really see on like Shark Tank. You get in a meeting with people that don't necessarily want to give you money. And in fact, if they give you money, it's actually a risk for themselves. And you have to convince them to believe in your thing enough to want to invest in it. The next day, I'm pitching them this Pixar level commercial. I send them an entire storyboard for this big metaverse commercial. And he's like, okay, I'm sending you $75,000. The people in this space are incredible at building technology, but they don't know how to explain it. This is an ecosystem that I have to have respect for, that has been living and breathing, that does not care who I am right now until I make it care. I thought that your resume makes you a thought leader, and it doesn't, right? No one cares what my resume is unless I can do something for them, unless I teach them something. People love that vulnerability. They love keeping open and seeing your own story. Fail fast and fail hard. Get your vision out there for what you want, and the market will tell you if they like what you're saying or not. You can have all the success as long as you know how to convince people to believe what you believe.
Hello everyone, welcome to a new episode of the LP Roundtable. Today we have Mike with us. Mike has a background as a Hollywood producer, but turned into a Web3 creative advisor, helping founders to pitch, sell, and scale their vision by crafting compelling stories and narratives. I think this is a very important topic for all the founders, so without further ado, I'll let the word to Mike to tell us a bit more about his background, his vision, and how he got on our podcast. Mike, the mic is yours.
Oh, the mic is mine. Boom. Well, dude, first of all, both of you guys, thank you for having me. It was just a viewer from the sidelines and love what you're doing. So I just wanted to jump in and see if I could provide any value. So yeah, my background compressed is I started out for my entire career. I've been just in love with film and really just storytelling. To me, it's always been the fastest way to connect with somebody, whether you want something from them, if you're trying to raise money for a company, or you're just like trying to connect with people in a new, exciting way. Like storytelling has always been, for me, the vehicle to that. And so I started out my career over in New York, where I was from. I started out on a show called Saturday Night Live. That was my first job ever. Really fun. It's a huge comedy program here. Got to work with amazing legends. Keenan, before that I was intern to Seinfeld. So I was just like always in that comedy space and was there for a little bit. After that, I actually became an agent to a bunch of content creators at one of the biggest agencies called A3. At the time, it was called Abrams. And I was an assistant. And then I just went to a work party, probably drank a little too much of the talent, ended up becoming homies with some of them. And the next morning, I thought I was going to get fired. My bosses called me in, but instead they're like, hey, some of the talent wants you to represent them now, so we're making you an agent. And so, helped co-represented just massive talents between 1 and 10 million followers, doing deals with NFL, Alaska Airlines, just every big brand you could think of, which has actually become really valuable because, as we all know, like everything is in the branding world today. And so if people want to tap into money or partnerships, they always look at sort of those giant Web2 brands. So anyway, had that experience and then was ready to pursue being a film and TV producer. It's what I've always wanted. Being an agent's amazing, but it just wasn't really for me. And so moved to Los Angeles. And then within a few weeks, I was introduced to a guy named John Goldwyn. John's family created something called Metro Goldwyn Mayer, MGM. So John used to be the vice chairman at Paramount. He greenlit Forrest Gump, Titanic, Braveheart, and then he went independent and did the show Dexter. And so I was lucky enough to meet John and was brought on to be his right hand. So at first that was in the capacity as his assistant. And I was like ordering chairs for him and like running around town getting lunch, like just, really funny, absurd, like things you'd see in movies. Because if you're in Hollywood, you got to live it. And so I was doing that for a couple of months. Then I became a coordinator and then an executive. And then before long, I was actually running his company with him as the vice president. So got to oversee the show Dope Sick, which won an Emmy for Hulu, Manhunt, which was #1 on Netflix, Guys and Dolls, which is a huge remake of a very popular show. And then all these other, an Oscar-nominated movie that we were adapting. Point being, John is truly, in my opinion, a storytelling genius and a legend in Hollywood, and getting to learn from him for years just furthered and nurtured that love that I have for storytelling. He was also an entrepreneur. And so getting to see the way that he thought about investments and helping other people invest, framing the story of what they were building was always just fascinating. So was there for a few years, again, building up that perch in film and television. And then I found out that Kenan Thompson, who was a star of one of those shows called Saturday Night Live, and Mike Tyson had a joint venture. They were building a company together, really a studio. They had a bunch of money. They really wanted to create content. They had needed someone to come in and actually run it and develop the entire mandate, the brand of the company, and the slate. And so they hired me, and I was there for the last 2 years. Got to sell 10 shows and films in a year and a half because the strike took out a lot of time. Stuff to Netflix with the guy who wrote and directed How to Train Your Dragon. I was doing a project with Kevin Hart and his company, Sydney Sweeney. I'm turning Candyland, the board game, into a giant live action game show, like the most absurd, ridiculous things, but I had so much fun and so much flexibility to just find the things that I love and execute on them. Really what I became was the adult in the room when it comes to the storytelling side, right? So much of what Hollywood really is what you really see on like Shark Tank. You get in a meeting with people that don't necessarily want to give you money. And in fact, if they give you money, it's actually a risk for themselves. And you have to convince them to believe in your thing enough to want to invest in you. That's really it. And in Hollywood, that investment is almost always a bad one. Like it usually loses money. And so what you really become a master of is, again, that same narrative through line of like, how can I tell this story in a way that it's propulsive and exciting and captures the thing that they need to be able to say yes. And so much of that is, number one, the brand of the person who's coming in, really how they represent themselves. And number two is really how you're choosing to position exactly what you're trying to sell, because a phone could be called a phone, or it could be called a camera, or it could be called a telekinetic device where you could plug into someone's thought. Like you can figure out 30 different ways to sell the same idea. And so what's the one that's going to be most successful and penetrate the market? So I did that for the last 2 years, had a total blast. And then I actually left to launch my own production company because I have so many of the relationships. I understand the game so much. As Hollywood continues to shrink, I just wanted to be really nimble to be able to create the things that I most aligned with, especially having that really premium, dramatic background. The stuff that I was working on was a little bit more comedy. So now I do both. Anyway, where does it get into Web3? And like, where does my branding intersect with why we're here? During the time that I was at Goldwyn, because things were a little bit slower at times, when you're doing a show, it takes years of development. I was just an investor in Web3. This is like 2020, I believe. I was just an investor. I loved the space. I didn't know a lot about it, but I found a project that was just amazing to me, and I started to invest in it. And it was early on. They launched like 550,000. It eventually ran to 220 million.
You can mention names on this podcast if you
Oh,
want
cool.
to mention,
Please. Yeah,
I'm curious, what's the project?
So
What's your
it's
first
called
investment?
Micropets, and
Okay.
the whole pitch of it very simply was I was on BSC, and the pitch of it was that it's your favorite memes turned into a Tamagotchi, and so you can raise them, you can play with them, you can stake them, but the bottom line is it's this little Tamagotchi that you can interact with and fall in love with. And when I found the project, that's not what it was. When I found the project, it was just these cute pets, but I had no idea what it really did. It didn't have a clear narrative. The founders were talking about doing like a metaverse because that's when everyone was, but had no idea how to get there. And I would just DM one of the founders and be like, "Hey man, here's what you should do. I would send him decks because I was just fascinated. Like I liked the space. It seemed really creative. I was bored. And he was like, "Hey man, like these are really good. Do you want to just like come on board?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so the next day, I'm pitching them this Pixar level commercial. I send them an entire storyboard for this big metaverse commercial. And he's like, "Okay, I'm sending you $75,000, which was the budget that I needed to actually produce it." And so I woke up with 75 grand in my account the next morning. I hit up my animation studio contacts, and I created this literally like this Pixar level commercial that set the community on fire. And from there, he's like, "Hey man, like you should just run all of our creative." So I became the CCO of this company. I built out their entire metaverse division. I also really, what most of my job was just finding creative solutions to big problems. So we were creating the first runner game. It was like a runner game on the iPhone store. And it was creatively done where you could get placement because crypto was no part of it. We had to really use like tokens and, create this sort of flywheel. It was really interesting. It took a lot of work and almost a year of time. The point is, our concern, as we've all had, I'm sure before, is play to earn games. People are just dumping on your chart. So how do you protect it? So I had to come up with a creative solution of this almost like arcade style reward system where you can claim certain, gifts that come up, and then those oscillate to something different, and people are competing to try to get them. So there's some inherent value. And so I created this entire system. We implemented it. The point being, I just had the best time. Now that brings me to today. The co-founder of that company's name is Tony Drummond. I will sing his praises forever. He's a genius. He has built up a perch as not only a founder who's done it and understood it, but also at Micropets, like we spent over 2 million or 3 million in marketing. There was 30 million in liquidity, 75,000 holders, 50,000 NFTs that we sold. And so it was a massive project, but we also made a lot of mistakes. We hired the wrong KOLs. We spent marketing in places that we probably shouldn't. We learned a lot. And so Tony took that experience and launched his own company as both a tokenomics expert, but also a community expert, a strategy expert, and really a go-to-market strategy expert. Tony came to me right after I left my last company, and he said to me very validly, Mike, that people in this space are incredible at building technology, but they don't know how to explain it, right? You read their websites, you don't know what they say. You're lost, and it says revolutionizing and innovative. Okay, but what are we innovating on? Like, what are we revolutionizing? Give me like the baseline before you iterate on it. Or you read their white papers and it's like it's in another language, right? You just can't understand what it actually does, what makes it unique, who the founders are. And so we decided to create this marketing agency and this content studio using all my relationships out here to the best talent in the world, to no matter what the message, no matter what is created, always to make sure the messaging is as clear as possible. That's our unique spin. And so why create a billboard if no one's going to understand what actually is on it? That's our methodology. And so a lot of our clients, they come to us. Usually we help them build out their go-to-market strategy. We build out their entire narrative universe of their brand, which in this space, people don't necessarily care about branding, but they care about conversion. And if it helps with conversion, then all of a sudden it's worth ironing out those messages. And we help them really stand out in a very cluttered market that's increasing with AI and only getting harder. So we do all of those things. Then we execute content campaigns for them, again, using the best talent in the world. So that's been my journey. I hope that it was not too confusing, but it's the best thing in the world. And now I individually help people with using that same storytelling ability. I help Web3 founders and have helped them raise millions of dollars in fundraising and pitching in their own personal branding, because it's all the same skill that, that I've used when you sit down in a room trying to pitch Netflix. So that's what I do. And what I'm most excited about. The company's called Convert, by the way.
There's a few things that I wanted to touch back on. Maybe the first one is not related to the topic that we are going to discuss today, but it's your move from New York to LA, or your move from New York to Hollywood, let's say. Because you hear that a lot of like successful people who are like, at least in the creative industry, that they had to go to LA to make it, or to make these connections to actually make that final or next step to success. Have you had that experience yourself? Do you think that was like very important for your career, that you made that move, that if you stayed in New York, that your life would have ended up totally different? Or do you think that's too far?
It's crazy. I ended up here because I went through a horrible breakup, and I came home in the night that like we broke up, and I booked a one-way plane ticket. It was like that level of like, I'm out. I'm ready to go and start the journey. And so like when you're wiping tears off your face, you're not really thinking about the fact that it might not be the right move or work. I'm really thankful it did. I have the best friends in the world. My brother is like in a building I can see right now. My best friend since I'm 15 is here, but it wasn't easy at first. No. Do you need to do it? In today's world, I could guide anybody to be a producer. I really mean that. I think I could take someone that is in Switzerland and teach them how to become a Hollywood producer in a few months of time, because there's a process to it. And if you understand how the game works and how to represent like you're in the game, you don't need to actually be here. It's so funny. The most successful people I know actually make their money in Hollywood and then get out. They're like, I'll produce in Texas. It doesn't, I mean, Glenn from Twister, if you've seen that movie, he just did it himself. He's talking about getting out of LA. You don't have to be here, but when you're early in your career, you do. The amount of times that I would be in a coffee shop and bump into somebody and be like, oh, like we should have a general meeting. It's just imagine a playground in a city where everyone was in Web3. Like everyone was at the top level of Web3 and was all, I mean, I guess it's Dubai, right? Like it has that vibe, but for the industry, it's necessary if you're early in your career. It was hard for me at first because it's a big transition, but it also, for me, like was the best thing that I could have ever done.
Okay. Yeah, nice. And the second question before I give the mic to Godly, because I think he also has something lined up, is you talked about Tony. Tony, and you built a marketing agency together, I think, or a creative agency. He got on my LinkedIn radar not too long ago, like a few months ago now, I think, and he keeps popping up, and like his tokenomics videos are great indeed. Do you have a hand in those videos as well, or is that just his personal side, and what you're doing together is more for clients?
So we've sort of like merged our brands in a way. It's like we're almost like this little and I don't want to say incubator, we're not, but almost like a little incubator where projects will come to us very early on when they've got like a pre-seed round. And then Tony will do the tokenomics. I'll start building out all of their core messaging and their branding. And then we'll do their go-to-market strategy. And then we'll do all their content and their marketing. And so we do everything together. The tokenomics stuff is his own separate business because he's been doing that successfully. That said, Tony's classes are amazing on tokenomics. He also did one on marketing. I did a full one on storytelling for Web3. I spent like 100 hours on this thing. So if anyone is watching, I urge you, it's free. Just watch it. I put so much freaking time into this thing, and I just want people to like gain value from it. I was like editing it on Premiere. My girlfriend's like, you have to go to bed. It's 4 a.m. I think I'm seeing ghosts. And she's like, just go. I can't. It's got to be great. And so every frame of that thing is like nailed. I think the only thing that made me sad is that not thousands of people have seen it yet. So it's free, and it has literally there's worksheets that I built. I've created an entire sort of like narrative framework. They're only like 3-minute episodes, and there's like 8 of them. But by the end, talk about how to build out your own personal narratives for your company. It will show you everything from your own personal story of who you are, your spiel, as we call it in Hollywood, or your bio, positioning like the light bulb moment that you started your company, your ambitions, your mission, your product ecosystem, like all your elevator pitch. All these things are explained with simple worksheets on how to actually create them yourself. So I would urge anybody, just check them out. Anyway, I was plugging that, but that was part of the same course that we created of tokenomics, community, and storytelling.
We'll add that to the show notes so people can go and check it out. I want to check it out myself as well. So that's great. And I think the Tony case that we discussed now, like how he pops up on my LinkedIn a few months ago, and then how he positioned himself as a thought leader. I think that's also what we want to talk about right now today in this episode, right? How to position yourself as a thought leader in the things or the skills that you have and that you want to offer to others. And it's not really a brand page that's being followed or that's being trusted these days. It's more like a personal profile. And we see that very much on, for example, a LinkedIn, where Tony, I never seen or heard him before. I don't know his background or anything, but he starts popping up and I've watched his videos and he's an expert in my head. Like, I know what he talks about. I know what he stands for. He's an expert. If I would be a founder and I need someone for tokenomics, let's say, okay, I got some friends who do tokenomics, but if I was someone else who doesn't have those friends and Tony has been popping on my LinkedIn, I know who to go to. So like, that's been a great strategy and a great success story of content and the power of content, I think. And that's also why we have you here to dig a bit deeper. Godly, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, just to say welcome to the cast, Mike. It's super interesting and really cool that you have so much passion for this topic. And I think it shows that you really are having the lever to have impact in projects when you join. And I think this is remarkable. And a lot of founders still underestimate the importance of communication, right? Like, it's good to have the best tech out there, but if no one knows about it, like, who's gonna buy, right? Like, how can you achieve product market fit if no one's testing? So I think it's getting more and more relevant. And you mentioned also with AI coming in. I'm curious how you navigate this space now with AI disrupting a bit content. Like, content needs to change. It needs to be, I think, more authentic and maybe more natural, not as designed as maybe 5 years ago, because then people maybe conclude, that's not actually thought leadership of this person. So I'm very curious to go a bit into these directions and hear your experience alongside, like, also how to start out. Like, our audience, usually they don't have yet the 75K budget to pay a team coming in, make this big noise. Obviously, once they went a bit down the value ladder, it's possible. But I think a lot of people struggle a bit in the beginning, and then they just neglect this topic because it's overwhelming. So if we can get some insights and tips and tricks, maybe also from your cast, and obviously we're keen to check this link out. Like, what's the first move? Like, I'm a thought leader I'm an expert, but I'm not a thought leader yet. So how do I transfer myself from an expert in my field into a thought leader people actually believe, which is not eating a whole my day?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot there, and we'll just break them down. I just jotted down the questions so that way we could talk through all of them. I guess let's start with the high level, which is like really becoming a thought leader, right? The best sort of way and that I could explain to that is this. When I joined LinkedIn, because in Hollywood, like most people that are out here in Los Angeles and in Hollywood don't use LinkedIn. It's just not a tool that we like. I never used it. I signed in for the first time in like maybe 6 months ago. I was like, oh my God, I forgot I had this thing. And you're just sitting there looking at 1,000 messages. You're like, oh. But I remember I decided with Tony what I wanted to do. And the thing that I wanted to pursue as a general level was storytelling. Because to me, that connective tissue, that's a layer 0 human stuff, right? That's before any business that you put on top of it. Storytelling is just the baseline. It's fundamental. And so I wanted to be, look, I'm a Hollywood guy. I'm a thought leader now. Like, it's going to happen. And I was very quickly humbled, right? I was very quickly like, all right, well, like, this is an ecosystem that I have to have respect for, that has been living and breathing, that does not care who I am right now until I make it care. And so I started to just do research, and I found other like storytelling thought leaders. There's one guy, and I've got a ton of reverence for this guy now, but I would look at him, and he was like an accountant before, and he was just like a big firm. And then all of a sudden he became a storytelling leader. And I looked, and he's got like thousands of people on his newsletter, like hundreds of thousands. And I'm looking at his tips.
Names, please.
I don't know his name. I will find it though. We can put it in the show notes.
Okay.
I might be dissing him until we get to the end. But no, I get to his page. Oh, I think it's like Noah something. I'll find him. But I get to his page, and I'm like learning stuff right now. Like, I'm like learning about storytelling. This guy's quoting like Vonnegut and like the legend, like Plato. And I'm like, I didn't know any of this stuff. Like, it was amazing. And so I'm digging in more, and I realized that the difference between that guy and me is not that he's necessarily a better storyteller. The difference is that he's doing it, right? He's doing the work. He's on this platform. He's creating content. If things are missing, he's probably deleting them, or he's like finding ways to make them better. But he's engaging with an audience, and he's creating a bubble, a sphere of people that want to sit down by the campfire and listen. And to me, that's really what thought leadership is. You can come in with a huge ego. Like, I came in with this ego, like I'm the best. I was very quickly humbled, and I don't actually think that, but I didn't have the same respect for what thought leadership was. I thought that your resume makes you a thought leader, and it doesn't, right? No one cares what my resume is unless I could do something for them, unless I could teach them something. And so it for me became like, well, what do I want my branding to be? Like, what do I want my like sort of thought leadership to be? And for me, it was like, okay, well, I want to just create content that for me, it does one of two things. It's either connecting on an emotional level to people, and it's outside of, again, the sphere of the industry they work in, or B, it's vulnerable. And I do that. I send a lot of text messages, and I put them as screenshots from moments in my life that were either really good or really bad in my journey. I did one for when the show Dope Sick got bought, and it went, viral for me, 50,000 impressions, which is a lot. And it was just like me in the moment that I was like, hey, like they're making an offer. Hulu's making an offer on the show. And people love that vulnerability. They love peeking open and seeing your own story. Anyway, we'll get into what makes a great thought leader in the specifics, but I think the high level is just, you've got to know what you want to lead people on, right? It's not enough to be an expert. I'm an expert in Hollywood. I'm an expert in storytelling. I genuinely believe that, but I'm not at that point a thought leader. And so now the work begins to start cultivating an ecosystem where you are one. People just have to want to listen to you. Really, that's it. Now, in terms of AI, let me go there in a second. Actually, let's talk more a little bit about what makes a thought really good, like digging into that process and your own personal branding, let's say. I think that the biggest thing that people struggle with, number one, is that they don't really know how to identify exactly what makes them unique. Like, what's their spin on things? What's their perspective? Or like me, like they have a lot of different businesses, right? We all are entrepreneurial. Godly said it before, like you're an entrepreneur. That's not limited to one scope, right? That might mean 20. You might have a restaurant tomorrow that I'm trying to eat at, and then like a trampoline park. I don't know, like Web3 might be one facet of it, but I'm sure you have other businesses, right?
Yeah, actually, this is what I want to mention as well. Storytelling is not getting more important in Web3. Like, it's all over the world. Like, every industry is based on these communication strategies and how you represent yourself. And I think post AGI, it will be even more like important for businesses to actually have this distribution angle under control and lock in by the culture. Like meme coins are maybe a good example, like where you can learn how to lock in a culture and have this retention of people just because it's you and the society around the community itself, not necessarily the best product or the best and latest technology.
100%. No, I completely agree with you. And by the way, if I'm ever talking too much, tell me to shut the hell up, because I can go on a little bit, but which I guess is okay for podcasts. But yeah, so
Absolutely. That's completely fine.
I agree with you. And look, at the end of the day, it's the same thing that we all love about cinema, or that we love about meeting up with a friend, who is great at telling us what they've been up to. Like you can meet somebody new and feel an immediate spark or like a magnetic, they might have a magneticism to them because the way that they're sharing what they're doing, their own experiences. I've sat down with people that have told me, I'll give you an example. We were staffing for a show and I read 2 scripts. It was a crime drama, right? And staffing means that we were reading scripts, trying to figure out who we wanted to hire as a writer to join the room. And there were 2 different samples for crime drama. The first was a really intense shooting, like very like propulsive action, right? That was the first script that I read. And I said, this script is really good. Like I like this script. The second script was about a girl raising a lamb. Like that was really, it was like a tiny little offbeat comedy about this girl and this lamb. And the script that I recommended, the writer I recommended we go with was actually the second one, the lamb one. Because if you could tell me a story about a girl and her lamb and make me care enough about it, you've done something right. Like over here, like I'm immediately going to buy it because this is action, but this requires skill. This requires perspective and storytelling that hooks me emotionally, that like plays, on a different sort of cognitive level that I can buy into. And so for me, like I always try to think about whatever we're doing, whatever business you're creating, you always want to make it feel as fascinating as possible or as interesting to people as possible. And so even if you're working in a space that I don't quite understand, if you could explain to me what you do, like I'm 5 years old, but in a way that makes it feel exciting to me, then I'm going to want to come on board for your journey. I'm going to want to be there for your success. And so that's been my angle personally. My personal brand in this space is purely curiosity and a bit of a maverick. Like I haven't cursed yet on this podcast because I don't know if I can, but if you'll see my posts, they're usually like me saying whatever I want, sort of like just yesterday I had one that was just like absurd. You could look at my LinkedIn, but the point is I like that sort of like playful jester maverick style. I think that people can connect with that. And storytelling allows me to pivot it wherever I want. But the other thing is just curiosity. I will sit down like, I did with you guys. I just wanted to meet because I'm fascinated by what you're doing. And that's my personal brand. Is I will reach out, not looking to sell you, not looking to take anything. I will provide value. But really my brand is I want to be so curious about what other people are building and then build those relationships around it. Now, of course, that's a very small part. Storytelling expert through everything in the fundraising and the projects. So that's a huge part of it. That's mostly everything. And that's an easier brand to sell. But all of which to say, I think that there are like mistakes that people make. The first one is they don't really choose a direction. They want to be everything. And the truth is that you can't be a thought leader on 30 different things. You've got to at least penetrate the market with one. And it's usually like, it doesn't necessarily even have to be the thing that you're best at. I think that you could learn in the process. I have found that a lot of thought leaders, and I mean this with a lot of love and reverence, and I won't use names here, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. They just become thought leaders because there's no gate to being a thought leader. As long as people show up, as long as people are clicking subscribe, like you're a thought leader now and nobody can tell you otherwise, which is why there's so much bad advice out there, right? I've seen so much bad advice when it comes to storytelling and for fundraising. I'm sure we all have. And so the sort of first thing is it doesn't necessarily need to be the thing that you know the best. You can do a lot of learning and research it. I did not know specifically branding in Web3 before I started, but it played into one of my curiosities that I had, which was, a tendency in my own branding. So that's
I like your comments about like finding your niche and not necessarily be the number one expert. For instance, I just had this friendly discussion between friends with Alexander Reed Evans he was ex-Kaizen and now Diverse. Rick, maybe you know him. And he just released a book called like How to Launch a Token. And he said, I was so fascinated. No one took this name before. No one released a book like How to Launch a Token. So he said, I'm probably not the best one in it, but I know a hell lot of things about it. So I take this spot. And now he's the one who wrote this book, right? So he's now the thought leader around how to launch a token automatically because he has a good publisher. So I totally buy in what you just said. And this is kind of, you need to be on the timing, right? And maybe that's more important than the actual deep expertise. Just find the timing, what wants to be taught.
It's unrelated, but it sounds to me like if you find a book title first and then you write it, it sounds like buying a domain name and then actually building a product. Reminds me of that.
You know what, dude? You would not be, maybe you would be shocked. There are movies where they've literally called in writers and be like, hey, so we've got a title. And that's it. They just have the title of the movie and they're like, we'll figure it out. Someone said a good title.
Yeah, because the title is actually important, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not to underestimate. Like this big hook in the beginning, like you can't pull or break like the whole thing.
If you just look at all these famous books like Atomic Habits or like just so many of these specific books, like they won't be that top book if they didn't have that top title, right? It's like they're all just titles make the book, make or break the book, in my opinion. Unless you're really like exceptional writer or exceptional celebrity or personality that people follow you and then buy the book. But like of James Clear, Atomic Habits, like people know him because of the book, not the other way around. I think that's the power of a title, and we are now a bit trying to focus on the other way around, the power of the personal brand. But it's a great combination to have those two together, and I think
probably there's many ways to achieve this exposure. Like my question would be like, when you start fresh, like as a founder, is there something to go wrong? I think a lot of people hesitate to just start producing content and be out there, but is it enough to just go live once a week, even if there's maybe 2 viewers in the beginning, but you keep on going and just tell about your passion? Or what would you recommend to step in, not to make mistakes?
Yep.
Or to take a bit this fear away from the whole topic?
100%. No, the way that I think about it is this: founders are very willing to start a company and not know and pivot a bunch of times. Why do we not view our personal branding the same way? Why do we feel like we need to, the second we press post, understand everything about ourselves that we, they have now externalized into the perfect form of content? It's ridiculous. It's too high of a bar. Like the goal, I think, of all of this, really the goal of personal branding is to figure out who you are and what you want to say, right? Like that's really it. Where do you like spending your time? And if you do create a platform for yourself, how do you want to use it? And so there's no need to have it all figured out. In fact, you might start writing things and not like it. You might feel like it's inauthentic to who you really are, or that you've run out of steam. I think that's a really popular one. People, a huge problem they have is they pick a topic and then they're like, oh, I've said the 4 things that I know about it. Now what? And there are exercises that you can do to find out what else is out there, like following thought leaders that you think are really interesting, reading their posts and going, to scratch and saying, okay, if I was going to write this post, what would my perspective be? And then you have a constant wheelhouse of new communication coming out. Anyway, you don't need to know right away, to answer your question, Godly. And in fact, I would encourage you to not. The more time that you spend, it's like developing the perfect MVP and then going to market and realizing no one wants it. Like fail fast and fail hard. Get your vision out there of what you want. And the market will tell you if they like what you're saying or not. Very quickly, there's a feedback loop in social media that dictates if something is working or if it's not. And that doesn't mean that you have to be beholden to it. Sometimes the other part of this is that it's a slog. If you don't have a lot of followers, or for me, like my branding, doing both Web3 and Hollywood, like I get a lot of confusion from people. They're like, who are you? Like, what do you do all day? Is it here? Is it here? There's a point of like mercy that you have to have where it's okay if things are not exactly as clear as the guy that you see on LinkedIn or the woman on LinkedIn with the perfect banner, the perfect title, and it's all insanely congruent. Like that's a great final version, but that guy didn't start there. No one starts there. That's built in a lab over years of iteration and then building out an audience. And that's the second part is this. Like once you build an audience, you can start to see what that audience again responds to and build around that. So I would say choose a few buckets and don't become a thought leader in one thing unless you feel you've got a ton of material around it. Instead, mine might be storytelling for writers. Mine might be fundraising because that's all about storytelling in the room. It might be about personal branding. I post these 3 sort of pillars right now, and I'm only just seeing what's working the best. And then at the end of the day, I also don't really care if the audience, there's always an audience for everything. So in my opinion, as long as you're writing well about it and it's exciting. So I'll lean into the one that I want, and then I will build my brand around it. And then I'll have the banner and the logo and everything that sort of lines up. But view your branding the same way you view your company. Like put in the work and allow it to grow. It's a real live thing. Steve Jobs, who everyone in branding loves to reference, he talked about how Apple, even at the top of their game, was still spending millions of dollars on branding, and it wasn't there yet. And you looked at it, and the packaging was brilliant. The Apple logo was perfect. It's like this thing looked like $1 billion, but for him, the brand strategy, who they were speaking to, the missions of the company, all of those things were not yet perfect for him. And the reason they weren't perfect is so they can't be. It's organic. It was always evolving day by day. Apple 20 years ago is not Apple today. And so I think that all of us should have the same level of latitude for our own branding and just start create some content. We could talk about specifics, but that's my perspective on how branding works.
Yeah, and I think on that note, like the worst thing you can do is actually be gray or be very general. Like you better be black or white, because you also want to spark this engagement, right? Otherwise, the algorithm is not gonna notice you. And it's better to post something which has some mistakes in it than people, and they're like people who follow you will correct you.
Yeah, they will.
Than to double check everything, waste your time on checking that one post to have it perfectly polished, decided to take out the things you were doubting about, and then you post it and there's no engagement at all because it's like just something general gray that everybody has seen. So like just post it, and if there's some comments on it or if there's a mistake in it, yeah, embrace these comments, go into interaction, and that's how you actually grow and how you build that brand and how you also build your knowledge and experience more.
Yeah.
And probably avoid AI, right? Don't use generative AI. Like originally type and just like from your heart. Or what's your take on this? Can you use it to refine or to concept, or maybe for things which are not actually producing content? But
so it's a great question. I use AI multiple times a day, right? Specifically, Claude is a great one. I don't know if anyone uses Claude, but Claude to me is far superior to GPT. I pay for all of them, but Claude is the best in my opinion. That said, it has a place, right? It's a tool. I use AI for me as a copy editor. My grammar has always been, I was a crap student. So like my grammar is not good, and Grammarly is like working overtime for me. And so I give it to Claude and I said, hey, just make this cleaner because I can be a little bit clunky. I'm like a good writer, but a little bit like, you don't need this sentence. We're getting a little long here, buddy. And so that's where I use AI, right? I also use AI for giving me kernels of ideas that I need to populate. But the truth is this, in Hollywood, I use AI wherever I can. I'm a big proponent of AI, but I don't think that AI should ever be used to generate original ideas because it just can't, right? It's always going to be pulling from an amalgamation of knowledge that's existed. And so the question of, can AI really have a novel idea? I tend to think no, not necessarily, but that doesn't mean it can't help you with your own novel idea. I think a lot of people fall into this trap, right? And actually, you mentioned it, where if you listen to AI for generating all of your content, you're going to end up in the gray zone. You're going to end up with things that everybody else already has, because trust me, there are 1,000 people creating bots right now, making daily AI content and posting it with faceless videos or LinkedIn channels and whatever. It already exists. The other thing is that people want your story. They want your perspective, right? That's what you're selling here. All personal branding, all being a founder really is like, how do you bring your own personal perspective to the operation that you've created or to the market that you're trying to share with? If you try to dilute that with artificial intelligence, my opinion is that you lose a lot of it. So if you're using it as a tool to craft your messages, if you're using it as a tool to refine what you're building, to make sure that you're not being long-winded, to translate it into another language, amazing. But to sit there and say to AI, like, I want to talk about storytelling today, or I want to talk about tokenomics today, give me topics, like outside of the very baseline, instead I would say to it, hey, tell me everything that I should know about tokenomics. And then look at that and see, well, what can I bring? What value and perspective can I bring, or personal experience? That's the other thing about being a thought leader. I swear to you, the posts that are most successful from people tend to be ones that are stories from their own experiences, because that is a framing. That's a context, right? If I tell you all about how hard it is to make a movie, you might go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But if I tell you that I used to sleep in my office on production and I was up till 4 a.m. and our director got fired, if I tell you this insane story, then you can put it into practice in a way that's clearer. AI doesn't necessarily have those same lived experiences, obviously, to allow you to do that. And the stories will, again, be duplicative of other people. So I would say it's a tool, it's part of a process, but it should never be the ideation of concepts. It should never be the one that's creating the building blocks. That's how I view AI in my own personal experience. And that's how I use it. But we should talk more about it if you want to get specific.
No, it makes complete sense. I think this is a very good kind of guideline. Also, like, where is this limitation of, you obviously pointed it out, it's just not capable to create new things. So you should be the original like brain and then use it as a tool to gain efficiency, and maybe not have 2 hours editing, but maybe just half an hour. But you can't cut out the work, right? You still need to be on the job and actually do the grind and be there. and share what you have, and not be afraid to share insights, probably, because those probably going to pull a lot of attention, right? Like everything generic, as Rick said, is already out there. Like yeah, sorry, Rick, go ahead.
I like that process that you described, and that's also how I use AI. So I'll just briefly share my process of where in the process I use AI related to content. Like for me, AI is my brainstorm buddy to start off with. I have my content pillars, let's say, that I'm interested in. You share that with the AI, and then you can ask, what are the topics that we can talk about, or give me many subjects. But then you have that list, and then you can take inspiration from that. And then if you take a topic that interests you, you take that topic and then you write your experience. You write, okay, about this topic, I have this bullet point, this bullet point, this bullet point. You have your few bullet points, and then you can give that back to the AI, and then it can actually write about your experience on that topic. So you have that process and you have two touch points with AI, but you still add in your own experiences. And that's how I personally like to use the AI. It's not like letting him do the work and come up with everything, but it's like using it to indeed brainstorm and refine.
Have you ever had it like go further than that, where it actually, I'm sure you've tried, hey, I love your idea here, but write a post for it. And
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What does it do? What do you not like about it once you get that result?
I've tested it out, but I see when a post is AI generated. It has this introduction, it has this conclusion, it has the same framework all the time. And even if you ask it to think out of the box or be more creative or be more engaging, like you just see when it's AI generated if you don't give it your own inputs. And even if you give it your own inputs, like with the process I described, you're still gonna see this structure. And you still need some refinements, right? Like I usually remove these last two sentences. I change the first sentence a bit, that it's more personal, but the rest looks fine. But like to make it through the whole process, it's just not there. It cannot think well enough, or it doesn't have that experience or background.
And I think also there's more and more tracing in the algorithms, like what content is original. Like they try to find out what was like derived from Gen AI. So if you refine it, like you lose this authenticity on the technical realm, right? And they penalize you in the algorithm, even though maybe it's quite original, just because of the refinement, it may be framed AI content and then not have the visibility.
Yeah. I don't want to kick us down a total tangent, but that's where I believe blockchain is going to be so incredibly just like pivotal, especially when we look at what like Suno AI is doing, or obviously everyone is still waiting to get our hands on Sora or Luma Labs, right? Like when you look at all of these content generating different generative AI, I apologize. When you look at generative AI, there's going to be such a mass flood in the market because the content production speed is going to plummet towards zero. And so our biggest issue, and I think this is what blockchain is going to need to fix, is filtering. The filtration of content is going to be the most important thing in the next 10 years. It's going to be everything when it comes to content. The question is, how does someone crack the best way to filter? And I think that blockchain is going to be really pivotal in assigning sort of original art to the original person, making sure that based on maybe your feedback loop or what your community thinks or your ratings, that like that certain trends more towards the top.
And literally just also like the authenticity of the creator, right? If you look at Joe Rogan, he already has like avatar videos out there of him saying whatever crap, and it's AI. Like some other people just fake it in. So if he has a signature to actually say that's my video, that's my content, like this will be needed for sure.
It's going to be everything, and I can't wait for. Like I'm looking for projects to invest in that are doing that properly, because it's going to be a game changer in my opinion.
Before we turn it into an AI episode, I want to touch upon narratives, because that's also an important part of storytelling, I think. And narratives is also a much said word in the crypto space. Like everybody talks about narratives, and I've been thinking with this thought of like, traders are looking for catalysts, short-term investors are looking for narratives, and like long-term investors are looking for fundamentals. Like that's a bit like that I'm thinking about, but like narratives is super important. Everybody's trying to find what's the next narrative so they can front run the narrative so they can make money, right? That's what everybody's trying to do here. It's the founders who are try to identify the narrative so they can build a product in that narrative. It's the investors who are trying to find a narrative or discover a narrative before it is actually a narrative, so that they can invest, put their money, and then ride that wave when the narrative becomes like mainstream. What's your thoughts on narratives? How to define a narrative? How to get started? Like from any perspective.
Yeah, I actually have given this a bit of thought because it's the one space that people care about narratives the most is on the macro level, right? Like you go into the company level and the narratives might be a total mess, right? It's like a hurricane came through the project. But as long as it hits the macro level, people feel happy. I think that's a mistake. I actually would invert it. If you really think about what is a narrative at the highest level or the macro level of Web3, it's what's in the zeitgeist, right? It's what's the sort of trend that people want to hop onto right now. And it might be DePIN or GameFi or GambleFi or RWAs, like tokenization of, different. I saw one that was like tokenization of movies. It was like, there's really cool things out there, but what's the narrative that's going to click right now? AI obviously is a hot one. That's fine. I think that those are really sectors that are growing faster. If you try to time the market, in my opinion, you'll always lose. I think that it's a mistake. Instead, I tell people to focus on your company's narratives, right? Like, who are you? Very simply, who are you as the founder, right? What's your own personal background and why do you bring a specific superpower that makes this company more likely to succeed? If I'm a VC, that's what I want to know. The second thing is, what problem is your company solving, right? What was the problem that you noticed? How is it big or expensive or real? Like there's a real market for this problem. And then what's your solution plus, right? There's something out there already. What's your spin on it to iterate on it to make it better, more frictionless? We see 1,000, and no shade to wallets, but we see 1,000 different wallets. The first question I ask myself is, okay, why would I use you over any other wallet that's out there? What is your personal narrative for why? Because nobody cares. Unless you can make somebody cares, we're on this. We're on fantasy football. Your kids are running around. Your attention span is 8 seconds. You've got to make people care. You've got to show them your USPs, what's making you unique. And I think that it starts with, number one, why the founders have this infiltration into this market that gives them a unique superpower. Number two, like what is the problem that you're actually solving in layman's terms? Very simply, without the buzzwords and the solution of, it's trustless. Okay, great. So much of that is implied in this space, right? It's trustless. That's how a lot of these things should be. What makes you better? What makes you easier? What makes you faster? Don't just tell me you're fast. Don't just tell me you're user-friendly. Like, why? Show, don't tell. And that's the biggest thing that I would love people to understand about their solutions are that you want to show them and not tell them. The other thing that people do, and again, this all ties into your own larger narrative, is they sell features instead of benefits. I would urge everybody, please look up Harvard Review's Elements of Value Pyramid. It's the most important thing you can do for your project. It's a pyramid that you'll find by, I believe, Bain Capital created it. And essentially it hits all of the core values that consumers need in order to purchase. Okay. It has things like emotional, right? Which might be like makes me money or is fun, right? You see things that start to help you diagnose the world around you of why projects, companies, brands are successful. Then you've got like the aspirational at the top, I believe. And then you've got like the functional at the bottom. Like it simplifies my life, right? Or it pieces together a lot of different elements that I needed. The point is everything that you ever do when you talk about what your company builds or you as a founder are building should always tie into one of these things on this pyramid. I like to take projects and reverse engineer their communication, reverse engineer their product ecosystem. So instead of just saying, hey, it's a wallet that's trustless and it's safer. Okay. Instead, I find what are the actual like benefits to an audience that's going to make them care? How can I then sit down, decide on a few, then talk to the founder and help you realize, well, what's the thing that made you want to start this company? What was the problem that you solved? What you wanted to solve? What was the solution that you sparked to immediately where you said, that's a good idea? Then I just connect those dots. I take value pyramid, the thing that we want to speak to, the USPs that you feel that make you unique or just a little bit better. And then I connect them and say, okay, here's how we're going to portray this in the market now. And so that's, again, hyper-specific, really micro narratives. By the end, what you end up with is a product that is simply explained without the jargon, because jargon is nowhere. It doesn't fit into this pyramid. So you just cut it. There's no space for it. And then you end up with products that actually have real benefit to people. So they're going to want to use them. From there, I move into people's, their mission, right? I feel that every company in Web 2 always tries to have a really important mission. In Web 3, we haven't necessarily seen it because the mission has been implied by the space. We let the space choose our mission. We say, oh, it's decentralization. That's our mission. that's not enough, right? That very quickly gets saturated. I don't care that you're fighting for decentralization. Everyone is. You're not competing against outside. You're competing against inside, right? Because people are already here. How can we make them feel that you're better than your opponent? And the biggest thing that I feel is that consumers are 60-something% more likely to click into a brand that they feel they have an affinity for, that they understand their story. And a lot of that starts with the mission of the founders or the company. And that's where you start to get something that I call narrative threading, right? Because if you look at who the founder is, typically the thing that they wanted to build is a externalization of who they are and what they're great at. The mission of the founder tends to tie into that as well, right? Why did they create this? Like, why this company? I could have started LaCroix, I could have started Apple, I could have started Sonos. Why did I start this company? Usually there's a mission behind it, and it's hopefully not just make money. And if it is, you better pretend like it's not. Like, you better find something bigger. So then I create their sort of mission, and from there we move on to the last thing, which is your vision, right? Everyone creates that pie in the sky that feels like it's totally unachievable. That's a bad thing. You're losing credibility as a founder and as a company. Instead, what is a practical but also exciting future vision that you feel you can actually get to if everything clicks into place properly? I'm sure you guys always see that. And so if you start to do all these things well, what you actually end up with over here, once you circle this whole bucket, is your elevator pitch. Now you're taking your entire story and you're condensing it into an elevator pitch that hopefully explains who you are, what your background is, what your superpower is, what you've created, the problem that you're solving, and the solutions, the benefits, the technology, sure, but the benefits using that technology that make you unique in the market and make you exciting to people. And that's really like the bottom line framework that I use. And it all starts with here, which is personal branding. That's zero. That's the founder's story. That's your spiel, your blurb, your whatever. But it all connects if you do your job really well. That's how you narrative thread. And that's, to me, how you succeed on a micro narrative level and ignore the top level narratives, because you'll never be able to try to time the market.
That's so insightful. I think that's really tremendous content you just produced on this cast. I think what is remarkable is we never really spoke about the audiences, right? There are different audiences you can basically promote your content to or write your content for. So do you think this is like one of the first steps as well to really understand like who you want to serve? I think there's some complexities. For example, as a person, as a founder, you start out, okay, I have information, let's say about industrial metaverse, and I want to share that. Like, who do I share this with? Is this with people out there, or is this with other companies I want to eventually sell? Like, how do you select the audience you want to speak to from a personal brand perspective, but then also transmit this into the actual brand content of the company itself?
It's such a good question. And I swear to you, like, you're hitting the biggest pain point I think a lot of founders have. Most of our clients that come to us, they start by saying, hey, I have this pitch, I've got this idea, but I don't know how to explain it to all these different stakeholders, to different audiences. And the truth is that you can't, one message is never going to work for everybody, right? Like, VCs are never going to be your target users. And so if you're using jargon with a VC, like if it's a game project, let's say, if you're using like very sort of gamey terms, like they are probably not going to understand a lot of them because they're not your users. They're just someone who's going to be potentially investing in you very early on. And so you always want to try to start by identifying, and I'm sure that you guys have done this in your own individual work, but to start by identifying who are your avatars, who is the very specific, create that person. Like, he's Paul, he does this on his weekends, here's what his pain points are, here's what his passions are. Like, create the sort of avatar that you want to speak to, and it makes it so much easier to actually know what to say. Like, it's very Alex Hormozy, and I know it's in his book, but those avatars are invaluable. I also would recommend everyone read that book, $100 Million Offer. It's like one of the best books I've ever read in my life. Anyway,
so is this the user persona you actually want to sell to? Or
there you go. Yes, there we go. Yes, it is. It's
so
user.
Let's say as a B2B company, you would start looking at, okay, how can I speak to decision makers into these B2B brands I want to serve, right? And this is the user persona. And potentially in crypto, it gets a bit fragmented. Maybe, is it even possible to use, like, for example, an X channel with that language, with a tone of voice which speaks more to retail users and still contain a good brand messaging on X with the company brand? Or because I see in crypto, you always have this kind of retail investor community which you need to serve. But some companies are doing B2B things. So I wonder how you communicate,
Yeah. So half of my career and like one of my superpowers is partnerships, like really high level partnerships, celebrities, brands, whatever. And it's because very simply, I understand how to speak to different people, right? And I think that that is the biggest thing that people can learn in this space is that you need to be able to communicate your idea. Again, I've said it from the start, simply to different stakeholders. And part of that, as you just mentioned, Godly, is the Web2 brands that you might want to be partnering with or reaching out to. Like, there's a world where you can have those partnerships as long as you know what to say. I always say to people, like, you can sell anything you want in this world, right? You can have all the success as long as you know how to convince people to believe what you believe, right? And so when you sit down and you're on your keyboard with whatever medium, it doesn't really matter, that will augment the style of communication. But you've got to realize that there's a person on the other end and you're trying to sell them on something, even if it's that you're not trying to sell them. So the bottom line is, how can you create various avatars as like the brand partner that you might want to be, account executive, they're here. The VC, they're here. The general audience for casual crypto gamers, they're here. You get really specific, you break up a couple, you've got the speculators for like the pump fund type audience that we're going to try to arbitrage, they're here. Great. Now take the iPhone, like I said, and turn it into 20 different things, right? You got the camera, you got the apps, you want to now turn the exact messaging. Don't be so like stoic with it. Don't be so rigid. Break it down into the pieces and lean in the scale in the direction that the other person is going to want to hear. Like, that's really the game here. And so I might say, if I know that you're a photographer, Rick, I might say this has got the best new camera possible, right? 2-3 lenses, 12 megapixels. And all of a sudden you're going, wow, this is great. But Godly, let's say I know that you're a content creator. I might tell you that Premiere Pro is now partnered up with us and you could edit, seamlessly on the go. And now I'm selling you something different about it. Again, I want to sell you not the features always, I want to say the benefit, but you sort of get the idea. And then if I'm partnering up with the content, with the KOL, I might say, well, this has got so much prestige and everyone's using it right now. Bottom line is, you take the same company, the same background that you have, whatever you're trying to sell, whether it's your company or your individual brand, you position different things based on the target avatars you're trying to sell to. And so that's what I do. That's the avatars that I've created. I have 2 distinct avatars for me. I have founders of just Web3 companies, right, that usually are right after their pre-seed and are looking for help on how to tell their story, or even are trying to do like a brand reimagination. That might be a third character. They've got really fleshed out brands that might be dying in the market and might need a new spin. Those are the 2. And then I've got screenwriters, Hollywood wannabe producers that need help. Like, those are my sort of 3 buckets. And now that I know who I'm speaking to, I can guide the conversation to know what to say. The medium, the Twitter, the X, the Telegram, that's just going to change the mode of communication a little bit in the style, but that's how I would build it out. And that's what I do personally for all the companies that I advise or, come on as clients of ours.
And like a practical tip, because this whole avatar thing, that might sound obvious on paper and everybody's saying, make an avatar, write down how that ideal avatar looks like, etc. Yeah, it makes sense. But how do I do this in practice? And one thing I discovered when I was trying to figure this out for myself was like, for me, it was very easy to I took my girlfriend as an example to explain. And like back in the days, that was NFTs, trying to explain NFTs. She had no knowledge. But if I could explain it to her, anybody could understand. So if I see her understanding it, it means that the general audience or the people that I want to reach, for example, back then, would understand it. And if you have somebody in mind who could be your ideal audience, just tell it to that person instead of tell it to a small bio of an avatar, because that's still like very conceptual, that bio. But if you have a face in front of you, you're actually gonna talk or write or say the things that you would say to that person in the language you would say to somebody of that audience or level. And I think really putting a face on it, and then even better, a face that and you know what that person does or what that person stands for, is very much going to help in crafting that story correctly.
100%. 100%. I think it was Da Vinci who said that simplicity is the ultimate. He said the simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. I apologize. And it's true. It's like the hardest thing for anybody is just to distill down very complex ideas into things that are simple and soluble to different target avatars. But that is the sort of quest that I'm on. That's the hill that I'll die on. I am not building for Web3 today. I'm not doing this for Web3 today. I'm doing it because the reason I'm here is because I truly believe in the technology and the community. I think that there's so much incredible value here. I know we're going to unlock more liquidity, but we've got to convince people to join this space first, to come to our events, to want to be part of it, to invest. But all of that comes from simplicity. If you start to lose people with jargon and buzzwords, they're never going to want to enter the space. It's always going to hurt the reputation of the space. And so instead, I say, okay, I bet you I can convince my friends who hate Web3 to want to be part of it again if I sit down and talk to them about very specific projects. Very often, like, these archetypes ring true throughout whatever sector you're in, right? Fun is fun. Pump fun. People hate it. I kind of like it. It's fun. Like, it's speculative. It's gambling. Should I like it? Probably not. Does my girlfriend like that I like it? Absolutely not. But it's fun for me as long as I know what it is. It's not a representation of the space to me. It's a faction, a tiny little sector of the space that happens to actually be a lot bigger than people would like. They want to create the other stuff around it and scale that up bigger. That's okay. But my point is that, like, fun is fun, and you can tell anybody on, hey, imagine you can go on and gamble on the presidency. You put in your money, you can get money out if you're right. Like Poly Market, boom, right? There are ways to frame things that are Web3 and just make them feel like they're accessible to everyone. That's the goal that I'm trying to accomplish in this space, to increase the liquidity, to bring back a lot of reputational damage that I think has been done over time, and to restore the space to what I know it will be, because I love it and I believe in it.
And then
Well said.
talking about where we want to go, I think this could be the last question as well. We've seen an evolution of like personal brands, and personal branding has been coming up over the past 5-6 years. Like, it's really becoming a thing that people start trusting faces and personalities more than actual brands. So the personal branding is going to become very important for these businesses and projects. That's been the past 5 years up until today. Where do you think that's going? And maybe we can also tie in the question of long form content versus short form content, because that's another question I have for you. What's your opinion on, what do you think another evolution that we've seen over these past 5 years? We went from long form YouTube to short form to a bit longer form content, but still short form is king. Are these two things tied? And what's your opinion on both the personal branding future as well as like long form, short form?
Yeah, it's going to continue to be important. I think we all realize that AI is only going to get better, not to make this about that, but the people will only generate more and more, and certain things are going to need like thresholds to stand out, right? I think that when things start to become difficult to navigate and the storms get more severe, we look to the people that we trust. And I think that a personal branding is that lighthouse in the storm. It's the thing that we can say, okay, this reporter that I know, they posted on a Twitter that this happened. I know it's real, right? I think that the same thing with, like, if I look at any global events in Web3 or blockchain, like, there are certain people that I'll follow and I'll say, okay, like, this is real because I can trust them. They're a valid source of information or news or guidance, right? And I think that's the other thing. As more people have more perspectives, and a lot of them tend to be wrong, there's going to be a lot of young people that come out and are just totally misguided. Like, they'd have no idea what to focus on anymore, and they're distracted by all of the things that are incorrect. That, to me, is the biggest risk that social media, that content creation, that all of that poses, is that you don't know it's real. And so you start to create content based off it, or live your life or run your business based on things that are wrong. So what do? We look at the authors, we look at the Hermoses of the world, who we hold up a candle to and say, you are correct. Like, your perspective, it might not be perfect, but you're doing the right thing. You are a thought leader that I can align with. I think that trying to be that version, trying to not just create what everyone else is doing, but sitting down and saying, what's my real perspective? Like, okay, I want to do storytelling. I want to do marketing. Great. There's so much out there. Like, let me actually have fun with this. Like, what do I truly believe? And if you start from there and then you back it up with facts, all of a sudden now you're becoming, in my opinion, a thought leader who's worth following, because you have your own perspective on things. So that's the first thing, is like, we need thought leaders. I encourage everyone to try to become one, but not for becoming a thought leader. If that's your goal, is to become a thought leader, I think that your mission is starting off wrong. I think instead you've got to say, where do I feel I can be additive to the conversation? That's it. Like, where do I feel that people don't know this, or they're not thinking about this, or they're just plain wrong about this? And I want to come in now. I want to intercept some of that attention and teach people, for a level of benevolence, the right perspectives from what I've learned or from my lived experience. If that's what you push for, then becoming a thought leader is just a consequence of that, right? It's just a positive externality of it. So that's the first thing. In terms of long versus short content, it's funny, like I've had clients, especially like Tony's had clients who will come to him and say, hey man, I've seen your post, I love it. And then I watched this 2.5 hour seminar of you. And that's when I knew that I wanted to be one of your clients. I think that we all have learned now that the dust falls off in length. And if someone looks really good on a LinkedIn post, doesn't mean you're going to have a great hour-long meeting with them. It doesn't mean that they could sit up here and take questions and answer with a level of authenticity. I think that people are revealed through time. And so the best thing that, in my opinion, is to create content that appeals to that sort of top of funnel, like 8-second attention span, but really like lives in that journey with the user so they can find you and meet you on a place that is your best domain, which should be showing your thought leadership, showing that you can sustain a conversation, that you are willing to hear perspectives. One thing I love that I haven't been able to do as much as I love to hear about other people's journeys and what their own expertise is. But like in a panel, you can't necessarily do that. On a podcast, you can't necessarily do that. So how can you create content that shows not only your own perspective, but the way that you view other perspectives as well? And so that's my perspective, is that long form is great for revealing your ability to sustain your thoughts, but short form is great to get people in the door, to give them quick tips, because most people don't have an attention span that will get them to that longer version.
That's a perfect framework, I think, like having the short form as a top of the funnel and then getting them into the longer form content. And once somebody has your voice in their ears for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you're going to sound so familiar that at a certain point they're going to think, okay, we are friends. I'm going to work together with this friend. I've had this experience myself personally, so that's so true. Thank you very much, Mike. I think we've tapped on everything that we wanted. Unless there's something else you want to add or Godly wants to add, go ahead now.
Yeah, I think it was a really phenomenal talk, and obviously we need to keep a bit of format, but there is not an end to this relationship. I think we're happily to continue these conversations on some specifics in another cast. It was really a big pleasure to have you. And I personally learned a lot, and I'm keen to actually engage in this link or this format you set up, and we're definitely going to attach it to the description when we post. I think there's a lot to learn for everyone out there doing venture building in whatever extent, or even helping founders. So yeah, thanks very much, Mike. It was a pleasure to have you.
No, thank you guys. Again, fan of yours, watch the podcast, really love what you're doing. I think that you, to me, are thought leaders that I wanted to follow and to be part of. So congratulations on what you've built. I will send you guys also, we've built our own founders community. We have like amazing people in it. We've just started a couple of days ago. So I'll send you guys an invite to get in. We're keeping it very small and only invite only, but you guys would be amazing to bring your own perspective. We want to do panels. We're doing our first event, I think tomorrow. We're going to be doing pitch seminars and workshops and storytelling and workshops in tokenomics and branding. So we'll get you guys in. And then would encourage everyone, just go watch the free course that we have. I promise you there's so much value in there. I just want to I want people to just take it and learn from it. There's nothing better to me than the comment that I get of this really helped me or this changed my perspective. That is the most important thing. It's not about selling anything. It's just like, how can I enrich the space? So please check it out. And thank you guys again for having me. This has been a total blast. And I can't wait to build on the relationship with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, like I think we could keep this conversation going for another hour, but there's many topics that I want to go deeper in, but I think we can make a whole new episode of that as well. So we'll definitely bring you back to talk about pitching and founders and how to structure your pitch and all of that. That's another area that I'm really interested in, like storytelling and pitching. So we'll get that scheduled. Thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed it. Very learnful. It was a great episode. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Appreciate you.